So how does a princess who gets declared illegitimate and even thrown in prison, how does she not just survive, but end up becoming one of the most legendary monarchs in history? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. We are diving deep into the incredible story of Elizabeth I, the ultimate survivor queen. Okay, just look at this timeline. It's an absolute roller coaster. She starts out as the heir to the throne, right? But then, bam, her mother is executed and she's declared illegitimate. Just like that. Then she's imprisoned in the Tower of London of all places. It is a brutal, gruetal climb, but somehow she comes out on top with the crown. You have to understand, this wasn't just a tough childhood. This was a high-stakes masterclass in survival, where any wrong move, literally any wrong move, meant death.
So yeah, to really get who the queen was, you have to get the survivor she was forced to become. Let's dig into that. We're going to go right back to the beginning, to this completely chaotic world that shaped her into the incredibly cautious and calculating ruler she became.
I mean, can you even imagine? You're two, just a toddler, and your father, King Henry VIII, has your mother beheaded. In a single moment, you go from being a princess to a political problem. This is way more than a family tragedy. It's a public disgrace that rips away her title, her security, everything. Her entire childhood was basically one long lesson in how to survive. Just keep your head down, or you might actually lose it.
And the pressure just kept mounting. A rebellion breaks out against her half-sister, Queen Mary, and guess who's the #1 suspect? Elizabeth. She gets locked away in the Tower of London, facing these interrogators who are just convinced she's guilty. They're trying everything to get her to confess to treason, which of course meant execution. But here's the thing, even as a young woman, she was just brilliant. She played verbal chess with them, deflecting every single question and never, ever cracked.
So she makes it out of the tower. She actually takes the throne. You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Nope. Her problems were just beginning. She inherits this kingdom that is literally on the verge of ripping itself apart over religion. So how on earth is she going to handle that?
Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you've got the staunch Catholics. They see her as an illegitimate heretic. But on the other side, you've got the super radical Puritans who want to just erase every single bit of Catholic tradition from England. Picking either side, that's a one-way ticket to civil war.
So what does she do? Something absolutely genius. Instead of picking a side, she carves out a path right down the middle. She makes England a Protestant country, sure, but she keeps things that would feel familiar to Catholics, like bishops and fancy robes. And then, and this is a masterstroke, she calls herself the supreme governor of the church, not the supreme head. It sounds like a small change, but it was huge. It was a clever way to sidestep the whole issue of a woman leading the church. This wasn't about faith, it was pure, brilliant political strategy.
I see and say nothing. This was one of her personal mottos, and wow, does it capture her whole philosophy. After everything she'd been through, she learned that the smartest play was often just to watch, to see everything, but to keep your mouth shut. And that idea, vidue et tectio, it really guided her entire reign, from how she handled religion to, well, the secrets of her own heart.
And that cautious, say-nothing approach, it definitely carried over into her personal life. A life filled with constant pressure to marry, and a throne that was never, ever safe from rivals and secrets.
Okay, so the entire kingdom is basically screaming at her, "Get married, give us an heir." And she played the game like a pro. She'd entertain proposals from all these European princes, using the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool. But she never actually said yes. Why? Because she saw the trap. Marry a foreigner, and England becomes a pawn in their game. Marry an Englishman, and you risk a massive civil war between noble families. So for her, staying single wasn't a failure. It was the ultimate power move.
But there was one guy, Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and pretty much the love of her life. But when his wife died after falling down some stairs, well, the rumors started flying. Was it murder? The scandal was just too big. For Elizabeth to marry him then would have been political suicide. It's such a human story, you know? It reminds you that behind the crown, she was a woman who had to choose between her heart and her kingdom. And that last part, that she kept his final letter with her until she died, that's just heartbreaking.
So this all leads to a really big question. Her love life was a mess, for sure, but the political threats she faced were deadly serious. Which one was the bigger danger to her throne? All right, let's break it down. On one side, you have Mary, Queen of Scots. She's Elizabeth's cousin, she's Catholic, and she has a very strong claim to the English throne. She was basically a living magnet for anyone who wanted to overthrow Elizabeth.
Then, on the other side, you have the threat of a husband, any husband, who could potentially take her power away from the inside. It was a constant, dangerous balancing act.
In the end, the threat from Mary just became too big to ignore. After she was caught up in a plot to assassinate Elizabeth, the Babington plot, that was it. The decision had to be made. It's said that Elizabeth really agonized over signing the death warrant for another queen, a family member, but her counsel pushed and pushed. And with Mary's execution, one of the biggest dangers to her throne was finally gone.
But you know how it goes. You solve one problem and you create an even bigger one. Executing a Catholic queen was all the excuse King Philip of Spain needed to launch his holy war. And this was the moment. The moment when Elizabeth's entire reign and maybe the future of England itself was hanging by a thread. Enter the Spanish Armada. We're not just talking about a bunch of ships here. This was the most massive naval force Europe had ever seen. Philip of Spain truly saw this as a crusade from God, his chance to completely crush Protestant England. For the English, this wasn't just a war. It was a fight for their very existence. And this is probably her finest hour. She actually rides out to meet her troops at Tilbury wearing armor and gives one of the most legendary speeches in history. "I have the heart and stomach of a king." It's incredible. In that moment, she wasn't just a queen sitting on a throne. She was a warrior, a commander-in-chief, the living embodiment of England's defiance against this massive empire. And against all odds, they won. It was this crazy combination of clever English tactics, like using fire ships to cause chaos, and just terrible, terrible luck for the Spanish with the weather. They called it the Protestant wind. The supposedly invincible Armada was shattered. And for England, this was huge. It felt like proof that God was on their side, on Elizabeth's side. So after that incredible victory, Elizabeth's status just skyrocketed. She wasn't just a queen anymore. She and her court started to deliberately build her up into something more, into a living legend. You could call it the world's first great PR campaign. Her choice to not marry, that wasn't a political liability anymore. It was spun into a divine virtue, linking her to the Virgin Mary. You see portraits where she looks ageless, almost like a goddess. And poets started calling her Gloriana, this mythical fairy queen. They were actively transforming her from a flesh and blood ruler into an immortal symbol of England.
But behind the legend, real life was a lot messier. This so-called Golden Age had its dark side. There were costly wars, bad harvests, economic problems, and a lot of bitter fighting at court. The reality is, in her final years, her popularity actually started to dip. And so, in 1603, after 44 long years on the throne, the great survivor passed away. Just think about what she accomplished. She took over a weak, fractured country on the brink of civil war and left behind a stable, more confident kingdom that had stared down a superpower and won. She really helped forge what it meant to be English.
So that leaves us with the big question, right? Was Elizabeth's reign a true golden age, a product of her own personal genius? Or was she just an incredibly tough and maybe sometimes lucky survivor who was a master at navigating from one crisis to the next? Maybe the real answer is she had to be both.